Going. Wonderful. Now I can introduce our speaker. So as I was saying, Kristin Anderberg works at SCCR as Senior Quality and Compliance Manager. She has obtained her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Emory University in Atlanta. Following her graduation, she has worked in the pediatric cardiac unit, ICU unit, and she has over 30 years of research experience working from AROs and industries, and her knowledge extends to clinical trial management for global studies, GCP, compliance audits, regulatory agency inspections, clinical event classification, quality management of clinical trials, policy and procedure development, and more. She currently is focused on clinical event classification within her role at Quality and Compliance Manager and endpoint adjudication. So we are very pleased to have you, Chris. Thank you so much for your time. I know how busy your schedule is. Please take it over.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's exhausting thinking that I've been doing this for 30 years plus now, but
that's why you have wealth of knowledge and expertise to offer everyone. Thank you.
You're too kind, but obviously I love what I do, so that's a good thing. You can see my slides okay? Okay,
yes,
perfect. All right, so today we're going to talk about FDA inspections and common audit findings. And please feel free to put any questions in the chat or raise your hand. Susan's gonna moderate, and we can take questions as we go. This will be in several different areas, so we want to get the questions when we're talking about the area. All right, so our agenda is going to be the FDA inspections, going through the definition of what a BIMO inspection is, most common BIMO inspection findings. We have a list of FDA references where I collected this information. Then we're going to switch over to audit definition and most common audit findings, pitfalls, and how to avoid. And then we get to talk about a couple warning letters, which I always find fascinating. So hopefully you'll be interested in seeing those two. And those are, you can just Google warning letters FDA and you can get them and peruse them. Most of them, unfortunately, have to do with food products, but there are still clinical research items as well. All right, so getting into FDA and BIMO. So an FDA inspection is what the Food and Drug Administration does, and they come out to assess regulated facilities. And this can be CROs, investigators, sponsors, core labs, anybody is within their reach. And I would say it's probably been about 25 years ago that the BIMO, or Bioresearch Monitoring Program, became available. And I am old enough to remember when food inspectors used to come and do inspections with us. Let me tell you, that was really difficult because they're used to looking at food facilities, and now all of a sudden you have to teach them on what a clinical trial is and what exactly you're doing. So I'm very thankful that BIMO is available, and I think it has helped the drug and device industry, as well as other industries, to make sure that we are doing right by our participants, and we're making sure that we get healthy products out to the general population. So what is BIMO? It is a program that is comprehensive, and it's usually on-site inspections. However, we did go through remote during the pandemic. They are going to look at data, they're going to look at regulatory assessments, and they're going to look at your research participants. There is a great link to BIMO from the FDA that gives you a checklist, everything that you need to know. And if the FDA were coming, I highly recommend that you get that checklist out and go through it and see exactly what they're going to be looking at. And then you can make sure that everything is up to par on your end. So what are they doing? Well, they're looking to make sure that we have quality and integrity of our data and that we're protecting the human subjects and animals involved, because there is a group that looks at veterinary medicine. And they also want to make sure that the new product approvals and marketing applications are sound. And, you know, we've heard of things in the past, and I'm sure we'll hear of things in the future too, where things go wrong. And it's the BIMO inspection has really become a cornerstone of what the FDA does during the pre-approval process. Typically, an inspection is going to happen once a sponsor or an investigator sponsor has submitted to the FDA their regulatory packet for approval. And they're going to come out and look at usually the sponsor. If there's a CRO involved, they'll look at the CRO, and then they're going to look at sites. What I've seen typically is they are going to look at the highest enrolling sites, and then if there's any problem sites. And they have all this information because it's been submitted by the sponsor or sponsor investigator. So they know exactly the protocol deviations. They know who's enrolled the most participants. So they are on top of all of this. And when they go to look at the high enrollers, they want to know, you know, why were they able to enroll so many participants, and were they able to keep up with their data entry, and did they follow the regulations and the protocol? And then obviously with protocol deviations, they want to look to see what happened at this site. Did the sponsor have true oversight? Did the PI have good oversight? All right, so BIMO, as I mentioned, there's several different centers that use the BIMO process. It also takes part of pharmacovigilance and post-marketing. So if you have a device that's going through a post-marketing or a drug that's going through a post-marketing trial, they can still come out and take a look and perform an inspection. They will go internationally. I have been involved with at least one trial where the FDA did go internationally and inspected one of our sites. But most commonly, they're going to stay within the United States. And they're also going to be looking at good laboratory practices, make sure we're following GCPs. As I mentioned earlier, they're going to look at the sponsor, the CRO, and make sure that the trial is being monitored appropriately. They will also go in and look at bioequivalence facilities, IRBs, any radiation that has been used. They're going to make sure the records are right. And as I talked about, the post-marketing. So the last bullet goes through the 6 different centers that the FDA is made up with for research. So CBER is the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. CDER is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. And then CDRH is the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health. And then CFSSAN is the Center for Food and Safety and Applied Nutrition. CTP is the Center for Tobacco Products And then CVM is the Center for Veterinary Medicine. This was taken from 2021. The FDA typically does about 1,000 inspections a year. Here, you'll see at the bottom, it's 611 were completed. And just, it just gives you a little breakdown. So the CI is for clinical investigator site, IRB, obviously, and then we have the sponsor and the CRO, a sponsor investigator, GLP is good laboratory practices, bioavailability and bioequivalence for clinical and analytical. And then PADE is post-marketing, and REMS is the radioactive. So the majority are going to be done in clinical investigation. So a lot of what we in SCCR are involved in. So what are some of the common findings? And all of this can be found on the FDA website. Susan will be sharing the slides afterwards. And there's links in here so you can go take a look if you so desire. But the most common findings would be failure to follow the investigational plan or protocol deviations. And we all have protocol deviations. And what that is not following the investigational plan or the protocol. It's obviously a very common finding. And I know as a former research coordinator and some of the coordinators that I've worked with in the past, sometimes you'll step up and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's not according to the investigational plan. But our physicians will go ahead, and I'm not saying this is Stanford because I've only been here for a year and a half, but they don't follow the investigational plan, but they want this participant to be enrolled in with this device or this drug. And unfortunately, then on our end as a coordinator, it becomes our responsibility to report those deviations. And, if this is something that happens frequently and it's a sponsor initiated study within Stanford, my suggestion would be look at that protocol again. Does that inclusion-exclusion criteria need to be updated? Are the visits too frequently? And you can't get participants back in. So if you're seeing a lot of these and you have the ability to work with the investigator and update that protocol, highly recommend. And then, excuse me, it shows the FDA that you are having good oversight for your protocol. You knew something was wrong, let's get it changed. Inadequate or inaccurate case histories or inadequate study records. This is also very common. As coordinators, what we need to do is make sure that we can get the best case history for our participants. Within Stanford, a lot of our participants are already patients of Stanford Hospital, so you should have great case histories, and you can get those printed out from the medical records. And I have always felt that it's best to over collect and over report instead of under. So make sure you have all the information in your case histories. And that'll also help you with adverse events. Don't want to be reporting adverse events that were pre-existing conditions. So another common finding is going to be inadequate accountability for our investigational product. And that's whether it's device or drug. So important that you keep the logs up to date When medication goes out to a participant, the study product, if it comes back in, make sure that the pharmacy is logging that back in. You know how many tablets or capsules have come back in. At the end of the trial, when it's time for destruction, make sure that that is all reported. Failure to comply with the Form 1572. I haven't seen it in pharmaceutical, but my experience in device, and I'm sure it's the same, in device, we don't have a 1572, we have investigator agreements. And if the investigator doesn't have an investigator agreement or isn't on the 1572, and they participate in trial in study procedures, that's going to be a finding. So make sure that you have all that documentation up front. Another important thing is, you know, the whole idea with the FDA and with our IRBs is to make sure that we are protecting our participants. So the informed consent process is huge. The participants need to understand what that informed consent is all about, what they are signing up for, that they are volunteering, and that they can withdraw at any time. So make sure that when you're consenting a participant, that you're getting all of this information to the participant, and then they're verbally letting you know that they agree and understand, and then obviously they have to sign. Another common finding is safety reporting, failure to report adverse events. And this goes back to having your histories. If you don't have a really good history on that participant and an adverse event happens and it's not in your history, then you have to report it. But if it's in your case history and it's not worsening, then you don't have to report it. And again, over-reporting is better than under-reporting. I heard an auditor not too long ago say, report, report, report until the sponsor tells you you don't need to report. And I fully agree with that statement that she made. And, you know, follow your protocol, follow the manual of operations. In those two documents, it should state what adverse events you need to report. And if it's unclear, over-report. And then failure to comply with 21 CFR, the Part 56, which is about the IRB requirements. And I do have a warning letter that we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation, where an IRB did receive a finding a warning letter. And, you know, that could be something simple as you're not documenting the meeting minutes, or you don't have all the correct people that needs to be attending the IRB meetings. You're not getting annual reviews. So the IRBs do also get findings, which is perfect because now we're going to talk about some of those inspection observations. So failure to conduct initial and continuing review of research. So everybody knows that on an annual basis, you have to update the IRB. And if you're using Stanford, you have to update. And then if you also have a central IRB, Stanford IRB still needs to be updated, as well as the central IRB. Failure to have the meeting minutes and, you know, the attendance, again, which I just spoke about, making sure that everybody is there, including laypersons, that you record the voting and make sure that there was a quorum. Failure to conform to the membership criteria. So it's really important not just to have scientific or medical people on your IRB. You also need to have layperson, clergy, so they represent the community's patient population. Failure just to follow the regulations for expedited review. There's only a few types of studies that can have expedited review. And then not having written procedures or promptly reporting noncompliance, suspensions or terminations. And the last one is failure to prepare and maintain documents of the IRB activities. It's really important that they, out of these meetings where they have collected all the voting, there was a quorum and any issues that came up in this meeting, they need to make sure that they keep all of this documentation together with the proposal that came in from the investigators. So moving on to common sponsor or CRO inspection observations, failure to submit an IND or an IDE for that matter. Let's say the physician feels that, oh, this doesn't need to be submitted. We're just going to do a couple different testing after this participant takes this drug. Well, it needs to be submitted. Even if you're not looking at new indications, it needs to be submitted to the FDA, especially if that product has never been approved or it's not approved for the intentions that you are using it for. Failure to select qualified investigators and/or monitors. Ensure proper monitoring of the study and ensure that the study is conducted in accordance with the protocol or the investigational plan. The sponsors and the CROs usually have the monitoring group. And it is so important that the monitors, when they're coming out after participants enrolled, are looking to make sure that that participant was enrolled properly. They've collected all the correct information, everything is documented. And if there's issues, the CRO needs to report back to the sponsor and let them know, because ultimately is the sponsor who is responsible for the investigational plan and the protocol. And not having qualified investigators. I remember back in the day with devices, some of the new ones that were coming out, you would have lead-in patients. And these patients were part of the trial. Not all their data was used, but it was really important that this brand new product they were being trained on and they knew how to use it so that they were qualified. Or it could be just as simple as you have a nephrologist working on a study that has nothing to do with nephrology. So they all have to be qualified, and that information, as you're aware, comes from either their FDA biosketch or from their CV. And then failure to maintain adequate records. And they need to be retained for 2 years after submission. If you're using sites outside of the United States, there are regulations that require Canada, I believe it's 15 years. Ireland is 25 years. So you have to know which countries you're working with and how long you're required to keep all of that information. And financial disclosures is really important. It's part of the Sunshine Act, and it's the FDA's way of knowing if there's any conflict of interest for an investigator. They could have a really high enrolling site, and the investigator, they come and look and they see that in the financial disclosure that Dr. So-and-so has stake in the product. Well, is he enrolling participants so that this will get approved and then he can make money after it's approved, or is he following the investigational plan? So the financial disclosures are really important to keep track of. So common sponsor investigator inspection observations. These are very similar to the last with the sponsor and the CRO. So it's maintaining and retaining adequate records, not being qualified investigators, not having qualified monitors, failure to submit the IND or IDE, inadequate subject protection, so the informed consents are not appropriate. Really important. Fortunately, we have Stanford's IRB, and they have a great template that we use and has to be approved by them prior to enrolling participants, but not all IRBs are as good as what Stanford does. And you might have items that are missed in that informed consent. So it's really not protecting that participant. And then failure to notify the FDA of termination of an investigator. And that can be for any reason. So these are just some terms that are found in BIMO. They're inspection classes. So the first is an NAI, and that's no action needed. And they either didn't find any objectionable conditions while they were out, or if they found them, they didn't feel that they would justify further regulatory actions. Voluntary action indicated, VAI, is when they find objectionable conditions or practices, but the agency isn't prepared to take any action at this time. And then an official action indicated is when the regulatory and/or administrative actions will be recommended for whoever received went through the BIMO audit. And this is just a list of the different compliance programs. And again, you'll get a copy of this, but it covers everything: clinical investigators, the IRB, the sponsors, and then risk evaluation and mitigation. So I also threw in some other slides that had common inspection findings, and this is for GLP, and we've got some bio availability and some others, just so you understand what else they're finding. So for a GLP, the final report hasn't been submitted, or there are circumstances which affect the data quality integrity. Study director requirements, failure to transfer data to archives, document unforeseen circumstances, and assure that the data is accurate and recorded and verified. Conduct, not all studies were conducted in accordance with the protocol. And yes, the GLPs do have to have protocols put in place. And if they don't have any standard operating procedures. And lastly is equipment. If the equipment isn't designed or doesn't have the capacity for what you're using it for, and then it hasn't been cleaned or maintained. And we do know that Stanford's facilities is responsible for, let's say, the majority of our equipment that I'm aware of. So they do go through and make sure things are maintained. So common bioavailability and equivalence inspection observations. So from the analytical side, they're missing validation, there's no quality control and no stability. From the clinical side, they're missing samples, not following inclusion/exclusion criteria, and they are not keeping records appropriately. And then post-marketing, failure to develop written procedures for surveillance and receipt, evaluation, and reporting on post-marketing adverse drug experiences or device experiences, late submission of alert reports, and late submission of annual safety reports. So a post-marketing trial is basically run exactly the same as the pre-marketing studies. You still have to follow all the regulations, report any safety events that happen, and any alert. The thing that's different about it is this is done on the general population. And you know, if you're using a select population in your clinical trial, you expect to see different findings, but you don't know until you go out into the general public to see exactly how that drug or device is going to work. So that's why it's really important to report all of those incidents to the FDA. All right, I'm going to stop there a second. Are there any questions before we move into audits?
No questions in the chat. So,
Awesome.
please feel free, unmute yourselves as well if you would like to ask a question.
All right. Thank you, Susan. So now we're going to talk about audits. And the first thing I want to do is go through an audit definition. There is still some confusion between what's the difference between an audit and a monitoring visit. So hopefully this will help to clarify it a little bit. So an audit is a systematic and independent examination of trial-related activities. We're going to look at documents to determine whether they evaluated trial-related activities and make sure that they were conducted according to the protocol. Make sure that the data were recorded, analyzed, and accurately reported according to the protocol. We want to make sure that you have SOPs in place, that you're following good clinical practices and applicable regulatory requirements. And that is, you also have state requirements. Obviously, we have Stanford requirements, and then the FDA agency itself. So a routine audit is just, a lot of people get worried about them, but this is just to ensure that you are following your protocol. The auditors typically are either part of the sponsor or they are a contract group, and they want to ensure that you're following the protocol, that the patients are safe, and that the data is correct. They're not out here to police. They're out here to look to see if there's any places that process improvements need to be in place. And when they come to a site, they're not only looking at that site and that investigator and how they're enrolling participants. They're looking to see if the monitors are also doing what they're supposed to be doing. Is there good oversight by the sponsor? So they're looking at a complex series of things to ensure that when this protocol and the data are completely finished and submitted to the FDA, there's no surprises. We followed the regulations, the IRBs have been involved, and we followed the state laws, and the participants were safe. There is also a for-cause audit, and there's also a for-cause inspection by the FDA. And Those only happen if there's something critical that's been found. And this can be found by the monitor, by the sponsor, talking with a coordinator, looking at the data. And so if they suspect fraud, they're definitely going to come out and take a look at you. If there's a ton of protocol deviations, and as I mentioned before, it's great if you can update the protocol, but if you're working on a sponsor trial, there's not really anything you can do except for mention that, we keep having these deviations because the protocol, the way it's written. But if you have extensive protocol deviations, you're not collecting the labs, missed visits, they're going to come take a look and see what's going on. And then if they're concerned about participant safety, they'll come out and take a look. So monitoring is done more on a routine basis. And they look at a lot of the same things, but it's really site-based. They're not looking to see, if the oversight of the sponsor is being done. They're just looking to see what the sites are doing. Are they enrolling the proper patients? Are they following the protocol? Are they following the regulations? Is there good documentation? So what are our findings with the informed consent? Incorrect versions. I would imagine things have changed. I was not around as a coordinator when there was electronic informed consents. I've always used paper versions, and it was really simple to grab the wrong version of the informed consent. It happens. If that does happen, you do need to reconsent. So another area that they have found is a lack of reconsenting participants. Inadequate documentation. Really important to either put in your progress notes or an EMR, stating that the participant has reviewed the consent, they've had opportunity to ask questions, they have agreed to perform, and the date and the time, or agreed to participate, and then the date and the time that the consent was signed. And if there was an LAR, you need to include that. But we've seen it. I used to have a little sticker that we would give our coordinators that they could put on the paper files, but we don't have paper files too much anymore. And then performing study procedures prior to obtaining a consent. So if there is some tests that need to be done prior, you should have a consent that is completed to do those testing. And then if they move on to the trial, then there would be another consent, or it could all be in one. But the most important thing is not to do any study testing prior to obtaining consent. And it's hard. You've got your doctor calling saying, hey, I've got a patient that we're consenting for this trial, excuse me. And you run down there and draw your labs, and then you find out that the consent hadn't been signed. So we've got to really work together to make sure that the participant has signed the consent and they're available to start the study procedures. Regulatory documents. So one of my colleagues, Joram Triggs, did a presentation in November about the essential documents and the importance of it. There should be a recording. If you missed it, listen to it. It was a great presentation and tells you exactly what you need to do with your essential documents, your ETMF, your regulatory binder. So one most common is missing documents. And back in the paper day, it was easy because you'd flip through your binder and you would see, oh, look, there's a blank. Well, does something need to be there? Or do we just need to put a note to file that says that this is blank, we aren't capturing this? Really important to have that TMF completed. Delegation of authority. This is always an audit finding. Read, if the sponsor supplies the DOA, read all the instructions. There's been a couple interesting ones that we have seen during audits recently, and things that we missed. And believe me, we won't miss those again, because the instructions were there. We just assumed that it was a regular DOA and, went about our business filling it out. Having the PI sign off date. If it doesn't say date, make sure they put that date in there. Dates always need to be with the signature. If somebody leaves, make sure that's updated. The majority of the DOAs that I've seen is if a task is changed, you end what they're doing now, start a new line, and put the new tasks and leave out the old tasks. Make sure again that PI is signing that document, and on a routine basis. And then missing signatures on documents. It's easy to do, but it's also easy to fix, especially now in the day of electronic signature. At Stanford, we're allowed to use Adobe Digital Sign or Adobe Sign. Make sure that you're getting your documents signed. And clarify with your sponsor. Again, back in the day, we had a faxed signature, and the meat inspector who came to inspect us didn't like the fact that it was a faxed signature instead of the original copy. So, make sure you know what your sponsor wants. I don't think they're making those same mistakes now with the fax copy versus the original copy, because they've all gone under the BIMO training. But check with your sponsor, because the auditors might understand that they can only use wet signatures. And if it is an electronic signature, it has to be Part 11 compliant. So you need to make sure that there's a date and a timestamp along with that signature, and passwords. So again, we have Adobe Sign. It's great. It covers all of our needs. All right, training. I always like to say that this is a low-hanging fruit, because training is so simple, but it is always an audit finding. Whether the training records are incomplete or they weren't qualified to be part of do some tasks. It's not documented. We all know if it's not documented, it never happened. You're missing the training records. They've been lost. Not giving enough training or the incorrect training. Again, it seems so simple, but it just isn't. Always the finding. So if anybody out there knows the best way to ensure you have training records on everybody, I'd love to hear a presentation on that. We're doing really well in SCCR, but there's still mistraining. Protocol deviations. These all, again, add up to not following the investigational plan or the protocol. So you're missing visits, missed procedures, not an approved investigator, the procedures not followed correctly. So protocol deviations are unfortunately, a low-hanging fruit, but life happens. Unfortunately, a participant can't come back for a visit. You got a protocol deviation. Just make sure it's documented and reported. Good documentation practices. Using whiteout or obliterating words, big no-no. And if you do make a change and it's a paper document, single line, date and initial, what the change or where you're making the change. Unsigned documents, another problem, and then post-dated. So to help us with good documentation practices, we have the ACOA principles. So all of our signatures need to be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And then they went ahead and added ACOA Plus. So the documents need to be complete, consistent, enduring, and available. So really important, easy to remember ACOA, maybe not each one of the words, but good documentation practice, huge, very important. Investigational product. So the first two are lack of participant drug diaries and compliance by the participant. You know, that's really out of our hands. Good education with the participants is really important so they understand that they need to complete those drug diaries and they need to be taking their medication or coming back for visits. So all of that explained up front when the patient enrolling, during follow-up calls, make sure you're talking to them, you know, are you taking your medication the right day and the right time, the frequency, and, you know, are you entering into your drug diary on a daily basis or whatever it's called for. Dispensing, and then discrepancies between product returned and taken. So that's more on our side that we're attributable for, so or accountable for. So getting the medication dispensed to the participants, and then when the product comes back, making sure to count each and every tablet, pill that's been returned and is recorded. And if there's some discrepancies, it could be because of compliance by the participants. So figure out what those are all about. Understand why there is a discrepancy between the product that was returned and taken. So pitfalls and how you avoid them. So we talked a little bit about training or education. Staffing can be a big problem. Human error, nothing we can do about that. We're all humans and we all make mistakes. External forces and burnout. So how do we help to avoid these? Making sure that the training is appropriate, making sure we have classes, making sure the training is documented. Staffing. One of the things we're doing within SCCR now is time tracking. This is the only way that we can justify additional staff. And I'm not saying that everybody has to turn around and start time tracking. And there are other ways, but you know, when a group gets large, it's more difficult to be able to understand what the staffing needs are. So if you've got a coordinator or project manager who is time tracking well over their 40 hours a week, you need to have some conversations with the staff to see what's happening. Is there just way too much work and they can't do it? Maybe you need some efficiencies to help. Do we need to get more people on the trial? Human error. This is when the monitors and auditors come into play, when they're coming out and they're looking at the documents, ensuring that everything is correct. And then other tools that you potentially have. But again, human errors we expect, we just hope that we can catch them and make corrections. External forces. This could be, the sponsors really pushing you to enroll participants, and it's just so hard to keep up with all the documentation that you have to do when you're being asked to enroll more and more and more. Reach out to your leadership team, reach out to your project managers, your CRMs, and say, hey, this is just getting a little bit out of hand. Can I get some help? What can we do to fix these problems? Get the PI involved. Burnout. I know this sounds really simple. Take some time off. I know with some of the trials, there's just so much work to be done. And if you take time off, you're going to come back and there's going to be so much work that it really wasn't worth taking that time off. But it's so important to give yourself some time to rejuvenate, refresh, and ask for help. We hate to see burnout. We want to make this work for everybody. All right. Any questions on audits before we go into the warning letters?
There is a question in the chat, says, how long do we need to keep the study records in the US? Because you mentioned the duration of time we need to keep it in country-based.
Yes,
so
2 years.
For US.
2 years after approval from the FDA. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So now I'm going to go through some warning letters. These, again, are on the FDA website. If you've got some downtime and you want to read some things that are going on, go out there and look at the warning letter. Sometimes these things just really are astounding. All right, so this one was really astounding to me. So the company's name is Buzz A Go-Go, and they have come up with an allergy be gone medication. It's a nasal swab used in kids. It's homeopathic, so it doesn't have to be FDA approved, and it is supposed to prevent some allergy symptoms. Their claim is that it's an anti-inflammatory, it's a prebiotic and a probiotic. They did get a warning letter for adulteration violations, and what that means is they're changing the product, and I don't think they actually officially meant to change it, but what happened is there is a ton of bacteria in these nasal swabs. And I listed the different types of bacteria that were found in these nasal swabs. And think about it, this is something that you're putting in your child's nose, and it contains bacteria. Fortunately, the FDA found it. I did look up Buzz A Go-Go to see if it was still out there, and you can actually buy the product on eBay. You can see it all over the place, but it's not being sold. So just a few weeks ago, on January 18th, there was a voluntary recall. And as I said, it's advertised, but it's not available. But because I looked it up on Amazon, I keep getting things saying, hey, you can buy this, when you really can't. At least I couldn't find that you could. But really dangerous for kids. Okay, so this one's about an IRB. This is Larkin Community Hospital, IRB. And the IRB is responsible for protection of human subjects and make sure that we're complying with the FDA regulations. They have their own sections in the 21 CFR parts 50 and 56 that they have to follow. This happened in 2021, and the warning letter was because the IRB failed to review proposed research at convened meetings. This is when they didn't have a member who was non-scientific. Happened apparently quite a few times at this IRB. They did not maintain and prepare adequate IRB activities, including a list of the members. And the IRB failed to ensure information given to participants as part of the informed consent in accordance with the regulations 50.25 and 56.109B. They had 6 meetings in 2020 without a non-scientific person in attendance. They approved research, and they never submitted a corrective action plan to the FDA. So the FDA gave them a warning letter, and they had to cease and desist and clean things up before they could approve any new IRBs. And I would imagine it didn't say in the letter that anything that they had already approved was going to have to be halted and looked at. All right, another warning letter, medical mics. This was a website with claims that the product they had would mitigate, prevent, treat, diagnose, or cure COVID-19 in people. The products were CDB. And they received a warning letter that they had misbranded the products. There was no proof that any of these products would prevent or treat or diagnose COVID. And they had 48 hours to remove their website or update it. They failed to do so. So they received a warning letter. And also investigators. So this was an investigator who failed to ensure that they were conducting the investigation according to the protocol. It was very interesting in this letter. So subject X had 34 doses that weren't administered. And subject Y had 43 doses that weren't administered. And the participant had severe anemia, which was an exclusion for this protocol, and had received a transfusion of 1 unit of packed red blood cells. And then subject Z, they didn't follow the randomization for dose, and they just dosed and adjusted it as they felt necessary. So the letter included the little quote that I have, that they emphasize that their failure to conduct the clinical study in accordance with the protocol raises significant concern about your protection of the study subjects enrolled at your site, and also raises concern about the validity and integrity of the data that's being collected at the site. So I would imagine that site, the sponsor wouldn't be able to use that site's information because it's not, there's no data integrity. And that can really put the sponsor in bind if they had to enroll X amount of participants, and now they have a site with who knows how many participants that didn't follow the protocol. They're going to have to look for patients or participants to enroll at other sites. And that brings us to the end We've got lots
One
of time.
question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, we got lots of time for questions.
Yes, I have one question. So, by the way, please feel free to put your questions in the chats, addressing everyone, because I have questions that comes direct message to me. So if you feel free to put it in under everyone, so everyone can see it. Anyways, the question is for case study number 1, which was the medication. What are the lessons that we learned from it?
Lessons that we learned. I would say that, one, you're dealing with children. So a trial needed to have been done. They needed to do better testing on their product to look for this bacteria. And one of the biggest things is adulteration of a product. So back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a cough syrup that I can't remember what they're called. People would be traveling salesmen would, be selling this cough syrup that they had put something in that actually was killing people. So that's adulteration of a medication. You're changing it. And there was obviously no testing done on things back then. And this group, thinking that it's homeopathic, that they can use, there was honey in this product too, which is big for bacteria, up in the nasal swab in a child. To my thoughts, that's just asking for trouble. I hope I answered your questions, but for me, again, I'm more conservative when it comes to research. When in doubt, you have to do a study. And, at least bench testing on this products to see if there was bacteria.
Thank you. Any other question? Please feel free to unmute or put it in the chats. Okay, one more question came in. You mentioned that sites need to have set SOPs to avoid FDA finding. If SOPs are missing department-wide, can the SCCR provide resources?
We do have our own set of SOPs. The nice thing is with Stanford, we have CRQ, who has wonderful SOPs. We also have the IRB, who has wonderful SOPs and guidance documents. And, it just depends on what type of SOPs you're looking for. We would be happy to discuss that with you, but I would look for CRQ Spectrum's SOPs, which are Stanford wide first. And then if you're missing something, reach out to Susan or myself, which here's my information. And we'll see what we can do to help you depending on what your needs are.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. You can always reach out to us. If that SOP that you are looking for is not available under CRQ or IRB, we can definitely discuss that. So another question came in. Again, direct message to me. By the way, excellent presentation. Thank you. We are using CRQ SOPs. Should be good, correct?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. They have very good SOPs, and we use several of theirs as well.
Yeah, and Peg from part of CRQ put the link there, and also Kira put the link there for CRQ So please, you can bookmark those links that they put in the chats and utilize it in future.
Awesome. Thanks, Kira and Peg.
Any other questions?
Sorry, can I also add one more plug for CRQ is, Chris, you talked about if FDA calls the checklist, which is great advice, of course, but if you're, if you get a notice from your sponsor that either they're hiring someone to come and do an audit or that FDA is going to come, reach out to CRQ and they will come out and assist you with the audit. I would still recommend, as Chris said, to download that form, but CRQ will handhold you through the entire process as well.
And they are huge help. And the other thing that they also offer is mock FDA inspections and FDA support as well. But take advantage of these things. They're so important, and it's so nice that we have the ability to have a mock inspection, see what they're all about.
And it's a comment there saying it's good practice to document SOP trainings as well.
Absolutely. Yes, Susan and Kira have a wonderful litmus system that we use in SCCR. It's fabulous. You can get reports. And it also contains what we do for outside of SCCR.
Wonderful. Any
the other thing now that I'm thinking about it, Peg, is IT is huge also when we have an audit. If you're using systems that are owned by Stanford, really want to include them in an audit or an inspection, just so they're available to answer questions. They answer questions about Box, REDCap, anything, and notifying the IRB if you have an upcoming inspection or an audit. So they're prepared if they have any questions, for the auditors have any questions for the IRB.
Great points, Chris.
Wonderful. Any other question? If there is no further question, we can definitely give the rest of your time back to you. Comments, very informative presentation. Thank you, Chris. We really appreciate your time. This has indeed been a very informative presentation. Thank you. And thanks everyone for attending. Please remember that if you are requiring BRN credit, I will email you, of course, the link. I just put it in the chats as well. You will need to complete the evaluation, and please make sure you mention your name if you are interested in collecting BRN credit for this, which is 1.5 credit. I will also include a PDF copy of the slides in my email for evaluation email. And then the link for the recording will be available on our website, maybe within a week or so. I will stop recording here. Thank you so much, everyone.